Hello, friends. This is Trip, and what you're about to see is John Dominic Crossan's visual lecture from Theology Beer Camp. That's right. John Dominic Crossan was a part of 2023's Theology Beer Camp, and there's a host of different formats that if you're one of the 450 people there, you got to interact with scholars in all sorts of different formats, and this one is where Dom dropped his lecture. In it, he digs into the historical Jesus, his message of the kingdom of God, and what did it mean? Where did it come from? How are we to understand it if you put Jesus back in his historical matrix? I hope you enjoy this. Dom is deeply invested in the visual elements in this, so definitely pay attention. And if you dig it, if you go, whoa, Trip, John Dominic Crossan, legendary New Testament scholar, this is too good. This is too good. How do I get more of this? Well, dear friends, if you go to crossanclass.com, you'll be able to sign up for our class this Lent in 2024. It will be exploring the historical Jesus in depth. You'll get interaction with Dom in live Q&As that we're going to do throughout Lent. But here's what we're doing. We're actually recorded and produced video lectures that guide us through the class. And you'll be able to go through those at your own pace or utilize them in a small group or discussion group or reading group type setting, and then join the live Q&As and interact. It's going to be a blast. So you'll be able to interact with the lectures, dig deep, send your questions, and be able to join live each week and see how Dom responds to questions and such. And on top of that, it's not just the live Q&As are not just me and Dom. We're going to have some friends join who will help us kind of think about how the message of the historical Jesus and what we've learned over time as we reintroduce the one we discover in our tradition to the time in which he lived. Well, if we do that, there are all sorts of different responses. So we're going to have some friends like Diana Butler Bass and Brian Zahn and Brian McLaren and such join us and talk about the ways in which the historical Jesus has reshaped and reformed their understanding of the faith. So if you want to do it, go to crossanclass.com and you'll get to not only interact with Dom in his rather compelling visual lecture format, but you'll be able to engage with us live, submit questions, and utilize the lectures and the live Q&As in whatever group setting that you want. So thanks a lot.
I'm doing something different. I'm not doing a talk with images. I'm doing images with talk. Two reasons. In the first century, 95% of the people were illiterate. They were getting the message through images, statues, everything else. So that's one reason. The second reason is this. Whether we like it or not, if you're watching a pharmaceutical commercial, you'll see people, the images, having a lovely time on the beach or at home, and the words they're listening to are the most horrible possible side effects. They wouldn't even take an aspirin. So, in one sense, the visuals triumph over the verbals. So, look at this. All right. Now, I'm looking at it up there. Look at those two images. First of all, with absolute gratitude to my beloved Sarah, who took those pictures, first of all, and then who cut them out with infinite patience in Adobe Photoshop. So throughout this, I'm going to say that. Now look at those two images. You have Augustus. Now, he's divine, by the way, and it's terribly hard when you're divine to remember to put on your clothes. So usually they're nude, which means the genitals. So you think, this is male. So look at him, though. He's got the whole world in his hand. His right hand holds the orb of the world. And on that world, there would have once been a little bronze, which is melted down, of course, Nike, victory. And she's a goddess, she would be holding a wreath to celebrate his triumph over the world. Look at the left hand. That's the scepter, the Orban scepter that you may know from the coronation in England. The Orban scepter, the scepter comes from the spear. The spear is a symbol of command long before the sword. So this is victory over the world by force. I mean, if you see this image, I could skip the rest of the talk, to be honest with you. Now, look at the other side. Okay, they're both male, though Jesus looks like garments that any woman would love to wear for a wedding or something. But the right hand is raised in the blessing of teaching. He's blessing, but his fingers, can't do it too easily, my age, 3 and 2. Always 3 and 2. Three persons in the Trinity, 2 natures in Christ. So he's teaching and he's blessing. And to the world if the world wants it. But in his left hand, he's holding a book. This is persuasion, not force. Yeah. And always remember this. He is never reading the book. He's the norm of the book. He's read it, as it were. If it's open to us. So please remember that. Okay. Now, that's the first image. Moving to the second one, please. Thank you. So the first thing is the vision of Jesus. 2 words. Emphasize tradition and traction. How you get going. So tradition and traction. Moving to the next one, please. Thank you, Eric. Okay, 3 questions. In the beginning is the question. If you say in the beginning is anything else, somebody would say, why? Descartes. Why? Doubt. So in the beginning is the question. 3 questions, but really they're saying the same thing. Why did Jesus happen when and where he happened? Why? Don't say providence or anything. Why not? Why was it Galilee, not Galway? Okay. Second way of saying the same question. Why did 2 resistance movements, and those are, of course, JB, John the Baptist, and JC, as it were, Jesus Christ, happen under Herod Antipas in the 20s? Now, these are real questions. They're not rhetorical questions. And they're basically saying the same thing. Why did Antipas do provocatively? Why did he provoke John and Jesus? In the 20s, when he had a nice, quiet reign for 25 years, from 4 BCE. They counted weird in those days, BCE and stuff like that. Yeah, that was before the Y0K problem came in. Okay. All right, so those are 3 ways of looking at exactly the same question. And the next one, Eric, please. Okay. The matrix for any historical innovation, revolution, requires 4 things simultaneously. This works for the iPhone or anything else you want to think of. There's a tradition. That's what everyone kind of knows and takes for granted. This is the way the world is, and we're all used to it, and this is the way it is. And vision. That's somebody with an angle. Somebody with a disruptive innovation, as it were. A systemic change. Something that could turn the tradition on its head or do something. But the time and the place are absolutely important too. You could have the most magnificent vision. If Jesus had tried it, let's say, 30 years before, he would have probably lasted maybe 5 minutes under Herod the Great. And if he tried it, 30 years later, the great Roman revenge of the Great War of 66, Jesus might have 10 minutes. Time and place are terribly important. All right, moving to the next one. 4 things then for Jesus. You have to understand his tradition, his vision, his time and place. And if that looks like the sign of the cross, that's simply a bonus, okay? So, the tradition for Jesus, I'm going to call it fancy language, intervention eschatology. That means we hope, we pray, we wait for God to do it for us. It's, and I'm not mocking at all. I never mock martyrs. John the Baptist, that's his theology. We can prepare, we can hope, we can pray, and God is going to do it. I call it intervention eschatology. God will bring God's own rule, just wait and pray. Jesus, tradition. What about vision? Next slide. Collaboration eschatology. This is what Jesus has to say. If you don't believe it, this is what we're talking about. Where did he get it? I think Jesus underwent a conversion. He began as a supporter of John the Baptist. He had a at least for the time he was under the water, he had to have the same theology. And what came? Did God come? What came was Antipas's cavalry. And John was killed. And God did nothing. And I think Jesus underwent a massive conversion that would make Paul's like a picnic. Then why didn't God come? Couldn't God have, as it were, moved it up a week before the assassination, the execution of John? Maybe God works completely differently. Maybe God has always been available. Any prophet would have said, duh. And God is waiting for us. Huh? So instead of intervention, the vision is collaboration. All right, moving to the next. But the time and the place are equally important. What's the time? It's the Romanization of his homeland. The initial Romanization of his homeland. You can't leave that out. You really can't. And neither can you leave out the place on the next slide. The commercialization of the Sea of Galilee. Now, all of this we'll have to unpack, of course. The commercialization as part of Romanization, which is about globalization. When you look at that map of the Roman Mediterranean, they weren't just trying to get a nice little donut around the Mediterranean, all red. Globalization was what they're up to. Mediterranean globalization, or as Jesus summarized globalization by saying, those that have get, and those that don't lose. That's Jesus' summary of globalization under Rome. So, going to the next slide then. We're trying to figure out if you left Jesus out for a moment and you'd never heard of the Gospels, how thick a description could you get of Antipas's Galilee? So if you're imagining Antipas in the year 20, let's keep it simple, what's going on? You don't even know Jesus exists. What's going on? As thick a description as you can give me of what Antipas is up to. All right? He changes his capital. Now, you don't do that. You want to really piss off everyone, try moving your capital. Really. So he moves his capital from Sepphoris inland, nice high above the Netofa Valley, very healthy, nice breeze up there, and he moves it to lakeside Tiberias. That is an extraordinarily dumb thing to do. It will infuriate everyone. No wonder Jesus spends all his time healing. Try living on a lakeside with mosquitoes and see how life is like. So this has to be explained, and it drives me crazy that my colleagues in archaeology and history, who all know this, of course, don't ask why. What's he up to? What is Antipas up to? And you're not trying to read his mind. You're trying to figure out, why would anyone move the capital, move it at this time to this place? He calls it Tiberias, of course. There's the new emperor, but he could do that by changing Sepphoris to Tiberias. So moving to the next one. Hold on to that for a second. Eric, could I go back to the first one? I forgot one thing. We know Antipas very well because 3 times in his lifetime, under 3 successive emperors, he tries to become king of the Jews. He wants to be his daddy, in plain language. And you have always to watch out for sons who want to be better than their father. Sometimes they make it, sometimes they don't. He wants to be king of the Jews. So the best way to become king of the Jews, he goes to Rome in 4 BCE at the death of his father, appeals to become king of the Jews, and has wide support, by the way, for it, almost makes it, comes back as an ethnarch, tetrarch. Ethnarch is a people ruler. Monarch is at the top. Ethnarch, tetrarch. You know, his tail's between his legs, as it were. And he has 2 little chunks of real estate, Galilee and Perea. They're not even joined together. He must have been really furious. But he waits. Tiberius arrives, 14 CE. The dates are important. Good old Augustus finally dies. People must have been thinking he never would. And waiting for the third day. No, there's no resurrection, so he's gone. Tiberius is in. Now, Antipas makes his move under Tiberius. I'm going to change my capital. Fine. As I said, don't do that. It'll annoy everyone. And I'm going to move it to Lakeside. I call it Tiberias, of course. But what's on the lakeside? What does the lake contain that the beautiful valleys around Sepphoris didn't? I could multiply the loaves and the fishes. I know how to multiply the loaves, and now I'm going to learn how to multiply the fishes. So all I ask you is just to imagine whether that's good or bad news for ordinary fishermen who used to go down, toss in their nets, or maybe even be able to have a boat. No, they're going to have to sell their stuff to his fish factories because his fish factories are taking the stuff from the lake out to Tyre into the Roman globalization. That changes everything. That changes the whole economy, if I want to use that word. So, for example, moving to the next slide, just to remind you, here's a beautiful picture of Sepphoris. It's from a villa at Sepphoris about 200 years later. But imagine what the aristocracy, they'd be all against it. What am I going to do with a used villa? I have to move 20 miles over there to Tiberias, and nobody wants to live here anymore. So I'm using this to insist you have to have a really strong reason to do this because everyone will be mad. The next one. So he moves, as you say, and he builds on a fishing village, beautiful new place, Tiberias. Okay, moving to the next slide. Look at those reeds, by the way. The reed is on his symbol, see on the left. If you're going up, what is a counter? Going up clockwise, it would be herodou in Greek. Herodou, you can see the D, the delta. Herodou, and going up counterclockwise, tetrarchou, and it's a reed. The symbol is the reed, and then Tiberius you can read on the other one. The reed, so when that crack is made about the reed shaken by the wind, oh, that's political. That's highly political. The reed symbolizes Tiberius. All right, moving to the next one. All right, now, watch the counter move. Remember, good old Antipas went inland to the lake. Who else goes from inland to the lake? Jesus from Nazareth to Capernaum. As Matthew says, why does he move his base? Because that's where the action is. Why was Martin Luther King Jr. on the bridge that afternoon? Okay. I think we can go to the next one. It's self-evident. So just an example, Nazareth is a kind of a tiny little hillside village, by the way, much healthier also, up on the Nazareth Ridge. Tiny, and Jesus moves, next slide, to Capernaum. These are drawings from Jonathan Reed in my book, Excavating Jesus, done by a brilliant Balog, he's a Hungarian, Jewish Hungarian, brilliant archaeological artist. You explain to him what you want, and he draws what it would have looked like. So moving to the next slide. Now, I want to look at something which is a symbol for me. Always makes me cry. It's the first century boat. They found a boat in the first century. They didn't find it in the first century. They found a first century boat in, 1986. If this was the shore of the Sea of Galilee, the water had receded in a drought, and there, right in the lake bed, you could see the gunwales of a boat quite clearly. Look at that. 12 different types of wood. Some magnificent boat ride was able to keep this poor little thing going, patching it. I mean, even the keel was made from an older boat. You can see the marks in it. So somebody was trying to keep this poor little thing afloat. It's like if you've ever been to Havana in Cuba, you see these cars, from the 60s, American cars from the 60s, and there's brilliant mechanics around here somewhere, still keeping this thing up. And one day they couldn't do anything with it. It was too old. So they took every nail out of it, took the stem post, stern post, mast, and just pushed it out beyond Magdala, let it sink in the mud. It didn't sink in a storm. I think, can you read it? This was done on a wider screen, so it meshed a little bit. First century Galilee boat, 12 different types of wood. I know it's got mashed up there. It's a symbol of the squeeze on small fishers under Antipas's commercialization of the lake. Okay? Now it's a symbol. You can say it's only one boat. What does that prove? Yeah. And I suppose Crossan, if you find a rich boat, you'd say that was Antipas. Yeah, I probably would. So it's a symbol. But it's also, it's kind of like a sacrament for me. If you really want to understand Jesus and traction, watch this. So I think we can move to the next one. Okay, so to end this for the moment, tradition and traction. It doesn't really matter how right or how brilliant what you want to say is. Time and place, traction. That's what I'm after, traction. In one sense, you could say Jesus wasn't saying anything that the prophets hadn't said and the Torah hadn't taught. Yeah, but traction was right. People were right to hear the justice of God. Okay, we've heard all about this stuff about the justice of God. You mean this applies to the distributive justice of fishing? Oh, yeah, that's traction. Okay, so can we move to the next one then? And see the heading again. This is part 2, looking at the execution of Jesus. 2 words again for here. Plan and protection. Okay? Because I'm going to be asking 2 questions. And you see now how I work. I work with historical questions, like probing the fire, to try and figure out, why did Jesus go to Jerusalem? If he went every year, you say he went every year, which I don't believe day workers could do from Galilee, but if he went every year, what happened this year? If he only went this year, why did he go this year? I leave out Luke 12. Okay, moving to the next one. So to begin with, how did Jewish leaders handle Romanization? Did everyone collaborate? Did nobody resist? And the only place we know, of course, is good old Josephus on the next slide. 4 things you have to know about Josephus. He was a priest in Jerusalem, say in 64 to 65. They made him a general in the Galilee for the resistance, the violent resistance, the war against Rome of 66 to 74. Then he surrendered to Vespasian. Nero had sent his best general, Vespasian, to put down the resistance. And he prophesied to Vespasian. This is inexcusable. He prophesied to Vespasian that we always expected that somebody in Palestine would become ruler of the world. Someone in Palestine, not somebody from Palestine. Oh, that was neat. Somebody in, and that's going to be you, Vespasian. You're going to be the emperor. So he ended up, as you can see, client to the Flavians. They hired him as their propagandist. Yeah, and moved him to Rome. Anyway, that's Josephus. The image there shows him. He's the one on the right bottom. You can see he's been brought before. That's Titus. His name is on him. You see his name in the cloak there. Over in the corner, you can barely see him. Sorry, my slides are widescreen. That's Vespasian. Up in the top left corner is good old Nero sending off his troops. So next slide then. All right. These are magnificent illustrations, by the medieval illustrations of Josephus' texts, because Christians in the Middle Ages were using Josephus against the Jews. See, we have our Old Testament, they have the Antiquities of the Jews. They all agree. And we have our New Testament, and see how God revenged the Jews in the war against Rome. Okay, but the illustrations are beautiful. So you have Titus. Vespasian is on the right. He's giving the power to Titus on the left. And good old Josephus is coming with the books that he's written, the Jewish War and eventually the Jewish Antiquities. Okay, moving to the next one. Here now, Sadducees, Pharisees, and Essenes, says Josephus, writing propaganda for the Romans. These aren't political factions at all. These are just philosophical schools. They're not political factions, dear Rome. They're like your philosophy. We're just thinking. Okay. But he also mentions, and give him his credit for this, a fourth philosophy. A fourth philosophy. And it is non-violent resistance against Rome. Ooh, I thought Christianity invented that. No, read Josephus. He writes through gritted teeth because he understands violent resistance. People do that. That's what legions are for. Otherwise, you're wasting your time. But non-violent resistance, he calls them another body of villains with purer hands but more impious intentions. And he's talking about the earliest example we have of urban terrorists, the Sicarii, who held little knives hidden in their togas and did that. Now, to be fair, this is the invention of terrorism. It really is. They only went after collaborators. They didn't kill people. They went after collaborators. So in this time, both non-violent resistance and urban terrorism were both invented. When I first read Josephus, this would be in the 50s, what struck me about Josephus, I was reading Irish history. Everything we knew about fighting the British was already in Josephus, including collaborators, traitors, everything you could think of. Josephus, including, we didn't have urban terrorists because we didn't have enough urbans. we had terrorism against landowners. Everything was there. So moving to the next one. Okay, nonviolent resistance. This is terribly important because this is what Jesus and John the Baptist are moving within. A climate between 6 CE and 66 of nonviolent resistance. They're experimenting with it. Every mode you can think of. For example, Caligula decided if I'm a god, I should have my statue in the temple. He told the governor from Syria, take 2 legions. He knew it. And my statue, put it in the temple. You had thousands, we have this in Philo and Josephus, thousands of men, women, and children. Because you're giving a warning that we come unarmed. They say that. We come unarmed, we come non-violently, but if you continue to take this statue south, this is happening at Ptolemais on the coast, which is the staging area. If you continue to take that south, you're going to have to kill us. So it's non-violent resistance, massively organized by somebody, I presume the Pharisees again, massively organized, backed up by a willingness for martyrdom. Okay, it's all in Josephus. I'm not making any of it up. And I do think more Jewish scholars and Christian scholars should talk about this, because it is there. All right, moving to the next one. Always nice to get rid of Caligula. Question 2. Why did Jesus go to Jerusalem? That's a magnificent image of the temple that's painted also for our book. Did he go for martyrdom as a vicarious atonement for sin? I think you've heard of that explanation. That is the standard Protestant understanding. Once you take out the politics, you kind of have no other reason why anyone would crucify a nice guy like Jesus. Or for martyrdom as a model for obedient suffering, which is much more the Roman Catholic understanding. That's why suffering is so important in the Roman Catholic tradition. Now, I'm not again trying to read Jesus' mind. I'm watching his actions. Watch what he does. The same way that I'm not reading good old Antipas's mind. He changes his capital. He takes it to the lakeshore. What's he up to? And that's a valid historical question. If you're a historian and you simply describe what he did, any student will say, why? And you better have a reason, at least a suggestion. Okay, so if he didn't go for either of those reasons, what did he go for? Now, based on subsequent actions. By the way, I'm very sorry. I realize it's hard to read that. I should have prepared this on the different screen, but that's life. Anyway, based on his actions and his supporters, I think here's what they said to him. Let me say it myself. Dear Jesus, if you're serious about this, they wouldn't have used the word collaboration eschatology. They've said this kingdom of God movement that you've started. Will you get out of the small dumpy towns in Galilee and come to the capital? For God's sake, get serious about this. If you really care, come to the capital. And come during Passover, when we have people from all over the world. I think that was the challenge. Take your movement where it counts. Their language. And they also must have said this. Don't worry, we can protect you. And we protect you in two different ways. By day, you have enough supporters, the crowd in Mark, to protect you. If they go after you, it'll risk a riot. And by night, get out of the city. Get to Bethany. Don't stay in the city by night. People can disappear. Even in a full moon at Passover, dark streets, people disappear. So, come to Jerusalem. Take your movement here. You have enough supporters here already. Next one. And what's he going to do? He's going to... Now, I know you may think I'm just using fancy modern language. He's going to make two demonstrations. Please don't think we invented it all. We didn't invent nonviolent resistance either. And we didn't invent terrorism in the modern world. At least they were there. And demonstrations were also there. And the first demonstration is against Roman power. Come in on the donkey, as in Zechariah. Coming in non-war to put an end to war. Come in, men don't ride in on donkeys. I mean, you could, maybe people would think, well, he walked all the way from Galilee, he just couldn't make the last mile, he was tired. No. They'll know exactly what's going on. So, first day is a demonstration. Look at that. And the real question is, why isn't he dead by Palm Sunday night, using our terms? If Jesus went up to Jerusalem to get himself killed, Pilate was there to oblige. He should be dead by Sunday night. So another question, why does he survive even to at least Friday, as we think? All right, so first demonstration against Roman power. Kind of mocking Pilate, of course. Let me back up. Passover was tinderbox situation. You're a huge group of people in a compressed space in the temple. What are they celebrating? Freedom from Egyptian bondage. When all they have to do is look up, and there you could see the Fortress Antonia overlooking them with the soldiers walking up and down under Roman bondage. We're celebrating freedom from Egyptian bondage, and now we're under Roman bondage. All it took was somebody to say, what's going on? I'm not going to take this anymore. And you have a riot. It doesn't matter if the soldiers coming in, the crush of people trying to get out the narrow gates at the south end, they'll kill one another before the soldiers even get in there. So, tinderbox situation. I think Pilate's orders for Passover would be the first one who coughs, execute him. We don't allow belches during Passover. So, understand it. Okay, the next one. The next day, security, Bethany. Read Mark very carefully. I'm not saying everything in Mark is exactly what happened. No. But I think the pattern is basically right. During the day, he's protected by the crowd. Achlas, that's all Mark says. Who are they? Where did they come from? And every night he gets out to Bethany. And Mark goes through a lot of trouble, as it were, to tell you day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. And that's the pattern. Okay, moving it. So, what happened to Jesus? Next slide. His first danger I kind of touched on, the volatile character of Pilate. Of all the governor, he's a sub-governor, he's under Syria. He's a sub-governor. We know more about Pilate than anyone else, I think, from Philo and Josephus. Forget the gospel for a moment. Next one. Okay, it didn't come over very well, but basically the story from Philo, I think in the original slide there was maybe 20 words: inhumane, cruel, disrespect, killing people without trial. You know, when you read Philo, you say, come on, nobody's that bad. It's about as bad an indictment as you could get anywhere in Philo. Josephus tells us that the governor of Syria dumped him after 10 years and sent him back to Rome for trial. He was in for 26 to 36. Then the governor sent him for trial. He's as bad as they come, according to Philo and Josephus. So this guy's dangerous. Very dangerous. Second problem, moving to the next slide. Okay, that's what I talked about earlier. Passover was deadly dangerous. And if you look at the next slide, we have two cases of tremendously bad riots at Passover in the temple. And you understand the situation. You can, you can't see it on that side. But they're celebrating freedom from Egypt under Roman. That's deadly dangerous. So I would say Pilate's decree to his soldiers for Passover, and he brought 600 extra soldiers up to protect Passover, was anyone who raises their voice, does anything, execute him as a warning immediately. Standing orders. So Passover is very dangerous. In the Passover of 4, funny things happened, 4 BCE, again, as I say, the large slides being compressed. In 4 BCE, under Archelaus, 3,000 were killed in a Passover riot. In the temple, just in the press of people. Under Commandus in the 50s, Josephus says either 10 or 20,000 were killed. Now, don't think so much of soldiers coming in and killing, just the threat. All the soldiers started to come down from the northwest corner. The Antonia would make everyone run to kind of get the southern exit. You wouldn't have to do anything. I doubt if you would have to even touch by the sword. Anyway, so that's the situation Jesus is going into. Okay, next slide. Now, if I am good old Caiaphas, and I'm smart because I've been in for 14 years, so I must be doing something right from my point of view. I know what's going on. I have my spies, and I'm not dumb. I know exactly what Jesus is doing. It's much too dangerous to touch him. As Mark keeps saying, the authorities wanted to kill him, but they were afraid to move in case of a riot. Yeah, they're right. But now I'm watching. Every night he goes to Bethany. So look where Gethsemane is. The road around the Mount of Olives, the north road this way, the south road this way. Jesus has to take one of them. I know to have my troops ready to grab him in the night, in the darkness, and get this thing over fast tomorrow before anyone knows what's going on. Now that, I think, is the best possible historical reconstruction available of what actually happened. And you see what lots of things didn't happen then. I don't think Jesus had a chat with Pilate, presumably speaking Latin. Okay? Next one. Rome, when Rome was confronted with violent resistance, they were ready for it. As I say, that's what the legions were for. Otherwise, they were wasting all that money. What they did was they took the leader, of course, if they could capture him, and the top lieutenants, and crucified them all in a row. So everyone gets the idea, this is what we do for violent resistance. And they'll all have some kind of a tittle that's on them saying. You can watch them. It would look like that. For example, 2004 BCE, that first one I talked about, 500 a day in 70 until they ran out of trees. This is state terrorism in order to terrify you, so you'll see what will happen to you if you resist us at Rome. But there was another one. Next slide. For non-violent resistance, Rome crucified only the leader. They weren't being kind or anything like that. They were just, you don't waste nails. Non-violent resistance, we kill the leader, and that'll take care of it. And if you're still at it 5 years from now, we'll kill your new leader. And it's not freedom of speech or anything. They just didn't feel they were a threat. You know, the people across the Danube and the Rhine, they were threats. But non-violent resistance, we just get the leader, and that'll take care of it. So if I only knew one thing about Jesus, that he was crucified by Pilate. I know that, by the way, from Josephus and Tacitus, in any case. That tells me nothing about his supporters being crucified. He was crucified for non-violent resistance because that was the Roman law. In the next slide, if I can read it. Okay, that came out nice. Quote unquote. The authors of sedition and tumult are those who stir up the people, shall, according to their rank, isn't that gorgeous? According to their rank, either be crucified, cast to the beasts, or deported to an island. You know, we don't crucify aristocrats because that might give people ideas how easy it is to kill an aristocrat. So we deport them to an island. So John of Patmos, for example, in Revelation, is deported to an island. Ignatius of Antioch, thrown to the wild beasts. Jesus crucified. Right on schedule for non-violent resistance to Rome. This is probably one of the most important texts I've ever read. This is Roman civil law. Roman criminal law didn't bother. What did you do to a rebel, a violent rebel? You killed them. Did you have a trial? Why would you have a trial? Why would you waste time on it? So this is what happens to Jesus. And moving to the next one. Here's the Roman mantra. Roman imperial theology, if you wanted their bumper stickers on the chariots, they all had bumper stickers. And this would be it. Here's our mantra. Peace through violent victory. This is the mantra of civilization from the very beginning. And if you were talking to Augustus and showed some surprise, he would say, well, what other way is there? This is the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Medes. Everyone does it. We are just particularly good at it. We didn't invent it. We just perfected it. So the mantra of Roman theology is religion. First of all, you worship the gods to make certain they're on your side when you go to war. Religion, war, those little arrows should be moved up in your mind. Religion, war, and then you get victory, of course. And then you get peace. So the gods are on our side because we worship them. That's why we have the Pax Romana. And I think this is absolutely fair. I really am not making it unfair to them. I think they would have said, we begin with religion. No, we don't begin with war. So the titles for Caesar the Augustus. Sebastos is Greek. It means the one to be worshipped. Sebo is the word to worship. It's the one for God worshippers, for example. Augustus is kind of pale. It's kind of, but this is a serious title. His subtitles are Lord, Son of God, God, presumably incarnate as it were, Savior of the world, Redeemer from sin, and Creator of a new world. He brought peace after 20 years of savage civil war. These were his titles, and these are his titles if Jesus had never existed. They were his titles before Jesus was born. Right? This is Roman imperial theology incarnated in one person. And justifiably so, because as I said, after 20 years of savage civil war, remember we had only 4 and we know what it can be like. They had battle-hardened legions on each side. And it was so much fun when we were just going out there after savages. But when we had legions on both sides, that's like having machine guns on both sides in to eating, and he brought peace. He was called princeps, not king. Princeps, which means first among equals, with all the equals dead. Okay. So when they said he's divine, I mean, they weren't making it up. They had reasons for that. He had brought peace to the world that had endangered the whole Roman Empire of going down the toilet. In fact, we had heard the flush. We thought it was all over. And he managed, Julius Caesar against Brutus, and then Brutus against Augustus, and then Augustus against Mark Antony. We went through the whole thing, 20 years of it. Peace at last. What do you want from the gods if not peace? And prosperity, of course, comes, and everything else. So moving to the next one. This is, what you're looking at is the tectonic plates of history, if you take them out of incarnation, as it were. In Jesus, you have peace through distributive justice. That's the answer. It's the answer of Torah, it's the answer of the prophets, it's the answer of Jesus, it's the answer of Paul. You want peace on earth, you do not get it through violent victory. They would have said, my language now, all you get is a lull, L-U-L-L, until the next round, which will be worse than the preceding one. So again, the mantra of messianic Christic, I use Christic to avoid the term Christian, which hasn't been invented yet, really. But Messiah is, as you know, anglicized Hebrew and Aramaic. Christic is the way I anglicize the word Christ, which is simply Greek for Messiah. Religion, again, non-violence, justice. And by justice, I mean distributive justice, not punitive justice. Peace. There's another way, we'd say. And then the titles, it's not accidental that you take the titles of Caesar and attribute them to Jesus. And you're not doing that because, well, that's the language we all use and it means nothing. The question we have to ask is, titles that made sense, of the Roman emperor sitting on top of the Palatine Hill in Rome and running the world, how could they make sense of a Jewish peasant from the Nazareth Ridge at the back of beyond? Maybe the whole thing was a great joke and they didn't understand that this is Saturday Night Live on the Tiber. Maybe that was the problem, that Rome had no sense of humor. We were really just kidding. Rome understood exactly. Non-violent resistance. We will kill your leader. So one final one. This is a magnificent example. It's from John's Gospel of something that I don't think ever happened. I do not think that Jesus ever appeared before Pilate. Pilate wouldn't have wasted his time standing orders. And I don't think he had a conversation. But I think this is the most magnificent parable since Jesus stopped talking. John's Gospel imagines Jesus talking to Pilate, and Jesus explaining to Pilate the difference between us. And this is the difference between the rule of God and the rule of world, or as I might say, between creation and civilization. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting. Of course. To keep me from being handed over. Pilate, says Jesus, as it were, look around you. Look around, here's your troops, they're all around you. I have no troops. My supporters won't even come in to fight to save me from you. This is what it's about, Pilate. It's about force against persuasion, if you will. It's about violence against non-violent resistance. So, one final comment. Remember, the most famous or infamous statement from Jesus was, love your enemies. And we usually focus on love and say, I don't know if he can do that. Why did he say enemies? Why didn't he say love everyone? I mean, that's hard enough. Love everyone. That'll include your enemies. because Jesus understood that nonviolent resistance, to my language now, to the normalcy of civilization is what we are about. There will be enemies, of course. And you're going to have to love them, because love your enemies is Jesus' way of formulating what we would call nonviolent resistance. If you don't resist them, then you're letting them be what they are. If you resist them violently, then you're more of the same. So nonviolent resistance is articulated by Jesus as love your enemies. All right, I think that is everything.